Hey guys, welcome to the Freedom to Flourish podcast. I'm Dr. Joel Miller here with my co-host and colleague, Dr. Tim Augustiniak. Today we're talking about the root causes of low back pain. And in our previous episode, we talked about the root causes of chronic neck pain. So same kind of story, but different kind of area of the body here, talking about the low back. The episode, if you didn't listen last episode, talking about chronic neck pain issues, we talked about a lot of the different muscles that stabilize the neck, and sometimes how you can have fascial imbalances, and sometimes you need work on those muscles in the fascia. But we also talked about how a lot of those issues actually stem from internal chronic health problems, like with hormone imbalances and with immune system issues, and even sometimes with gut health. So in this episode, here's kind of what we're getting at. A lot of people deal with chronic low back pain issues for years, whether it's athletes or it's just kind of your typical 9-to-5 desk worker, or if it's just the stay-at-home mom. People deal with low back pain for years and years and years, and they might stretch, they might get adjustments, and they might get a massage, and those things help. But then the pain or the tightness or the stiffness comes back. And so what we wanted to get into with this episode is really talking about, okay, what's going on there from a muscle and fascial basis there, what's causing these issues, but then also, and I would argue most importantly, what is the underlying health issues that are causing this, and a little bit of some insight into this. We find a lot of this goes back to the gut health. So we're going to talk about that a little bit there. So Dr. Tim, good morning. I'm glad you're here. Let's kind of jump into this.
Yeah, happy to be here. This is an issue that kind of hits home with me. I've had issues where my low back will act up as a result of gut issues, and until you get that sorted out, a lot of times things will stick around. So, there's a lot of topics on here that I'm like, man, I'm really happy that we do this for work, and this is just what we do because it helps us in our own health quite a bit. So, like you said, gut health, yeah, that's going to be one of the biggest emphases of today's episode. But there's other things that it's not like your gut just magically poof creates low back pain. There are reasons for that we are going to cover, and it relates to muscle dysfunction related to organ issues. So, like we talk about in just about every episode, there are embryologically derived connections between organs and muscles. And so, when organs become irritated, muscles become dysfunctional if they are the muscles correlative to whatever organ. And so, for example, stomach muscles are, your pecs, and then the forearm muscles, your bicep, all of those. You've got liver-related muscles, which are your pectoral division, and then your rhomboid muscles. You've got sinuses that are tied to your SCM muscles and neck muscles, so you'll get some neck weakness and issues there. That's why headaches are super common with sinus issues, even beyond sinus pressure. You have your reproductive system-related muscles. Those are going to be your glute muscles, your piriformis, your glute max, glute med, your pelvic stability muscles. And then the reason that gut health is so heavily correlative to low back pain is your small intestine related muscles are your quads, and so they help with hip flexion but also extension of the knee, so the meaty muscles in the front of your thighs, and then your ab muscles. And so if you have a chronic inflammatory issue in your gut, where you've got, say, like a SIBO issue, some sort of microbiome issue, parasites, food sensitivities, you name it, and your small intestine is not happy, your abs will not work. Your quads will not work. They will be neurologically turned off a little bit, and they will not accommodate resistance like they're supposed to. If your abs are not accommodating resistance like they're supposed to, they're not going to stabilize. And when your abs do not stabilize and your quads don't stabilize, what's going to make up for it? Low back muscles, your glutes, your hamstrings, everything's going to just hold on really tight and try to stabilize. And so where there is inflammation in the gut leading to that, you can try to adjust things. You can try to do PT. You can try to exercise. You can do whatever you want, but it's like trying to turn a light switch on when the light bulb just doesn't work. If your light bulb does not work, you can try to turn it on all you want, but it's never going to cause the room to brighten up.
Yeah.
And so the same thing goes on with your muscles. If the room does not brighten up, or if the muscles do not fire, it's because of the underlying organ issue. typically. And so you got to fix those things. So even beyond the organ issues, there are dysfunction. There are things that can become dysfunctional with diaphragm issues, force transfer between like your TL junction, your thoracolumbar junction, through like your lat muscle, your low traps, things like that. Fascial chains. That's if you want a big umbrella term for what causes shoulder issues to cause low back pain on the opposite side, or like foot pain to cause opposite side low back pain, stuff like that. It is fascial chains. It is the connective tissue chains that all of our muscles have connecting one another to transfer force. And then, of course, there's other layers of muscle dysfunction where, if we look at it from a bird's eye view, if a muscle's weak, we have to fix that. And that's where typically they're weak because of underlying organ issues. But then from there can be, after you fix the muscle, there can be compensatory trigger points. There can be a need for flushing out the fascia through muscle scraping. But then there's also other myofascial challenges where we can use the system self-care technique to kind of figure out what's going on. And so that's, moving something till it hurts and then it weakens another muscle, or we can kind of pinch over it, drive pain into it, and other myofascial challenges. So as a whole, we try to figure out where in the hierarchy each of these things falls. And so the most important thing is if muscles are weak. And so how do we correct those weak muscles? And so Dr. Joel, what do you say we get into gut issues and get a bit more into how these things come about, what our diagnostic process looks like, maybe different challenges and indicators that we find using our technique, and different symptoms that go along with that stuff. And then from there, we can get into how to fix it.
Man, such a huge topic. And Dr. Tim, we could go into this. We could probably talk about this for at least an hour. And of course, we've had other episodes to talk about the gut health. So I'll try to keep it more on the concise side. And for patients that are like, you know what, some of this does resonate with me, we would definitely recommend going and watching. We've got different episodes on gut health. If you just go to our podcast and search gut health, we've got different episodes on fungus and bacteria and parasites and stuff like that, if you think those are playing a part with your health. But two things I want to mention, Dr. Tim. You talked about the relationships between the muscles and organs, which are huge. And Dr. Tim, before we got into applied kinesiology, before we got into the muscle testing, I didn't know about this. Chiropractors are not taught these things. Physical therapists aren't taught these connections. Medical doctors are not taught these connections. It's when you step into the muscle testing world, the applied kinesiology world, that we start to learn these different connections that were discovered by Dr. George Goodhart and so forth, 60 years ago. And so some of the other connections I want to mention. So you mentioned how the quads are related to the intestines. And that's really interesting because obviously the quads help with, yes, the knees, but they also help to stabilize the hips with the rectus femoris a little bit. And then I think another point too that's worth mentioning is that a lot of times when people have a tight low back, what's actually happening there? Well, like you said, it's not just like the gut's angry and then therefore back pain. There's a connection, and the connection's through the muscles. So the core muscles are related to your intestines, your small intestines specifically. And so like you mentioned, if you have an issue there with an infection or a food sensitivity, the core muscles will not be activated. Does that mean you can do sit-ups? Does that mean you can plank and have abs? Yes, you can still have those things. But when we test the muscles for the reactivity and basically like stabilization ability, we find that they're not activated like they need to be. And so what happens is the muscles on your back, the erector spinae muscles, which go along your entire spine, they're these huge like rope-like muscles, they tighten up. They try to stabilize things to protect the spine. And that is usually the tightness and pain that people experience. The other thing people experience is, when it comes to the large intestine, we have the tensor fasciolata, the TFL muscle, which is on kind of the front of the hip and turns into the IT band. So if you're a runner or some kind of athlete, then, if you've ever had IT band syndrome or some kind of tightness, a lot of times that goes back to the gut health. But the other muscles related to the large intestine is the quadratus lumborum, which is kind of on the back sides, and it connects from the top of your pelvis and it goes up and connects to the bottom of your ribs. And that's a huge stabilizer for your spine and for your core as well. And so again, what we find is if there's an issue with, let's say, the large intestine, then you don't have the quadratus lumborum stabilizing things. And so then you have the erector spinae muscles, the rope-like muscles along the spine that tighten up. And sometimes you can have other core muscles tighten up because of that. Remember, tight muscles occur because your body's trying to protect itself, not just because of no reason. So when we jump into these things with low back health, yes, adjustments can be helpful. Yes, acupuncture can be helpful. But if it's an issue that keeps coming back, majority of the time it goes back to your low gut, goes back to your gut health. So, Dr. Tim, you mentioned, okay, what things are going on with the gut health? Well, you touched on a few of them already, most of them, I would say. So, bacterial imbalances, okay, fungal imbalances in the gut, parasites in the gut, and food sensitivities. Those are probably the top contenders for sure. Occasionally, you can have like gut irritation from, if you're getting too many oxalate foods, too many foods high in salicylates, too many foods high in lectins, things like that.
Gluten.
But those are probably on the more minor side. So to kind of be direct, Dr. Tim, when it comes to like bacteria and fungus, I like to group those together because if people have any kind of gas or bloating, they have some kind of bacterial or fungal imbalance. And so if you're a patient, if you're like, yeah, I got this low back issue and then I have gas, okay, you've got a gut microbiome imbalance. You need to fix that in order to help the low back pain. If you have bloating, same thing, gut microbiome imbalance, you need to fix the bloating. Whereas, parasites can also contribute to bloating. But I would argue that parasites are a little bit less consistent with issues. But I would say if you don't have bloating or gas, then, but you still have chronic low back pain, inflammation, chronic like bulging disc issues that just aren't healing well, I would say I find parasites to be a huge key in that. But the other thing too that's easy to look for is foods. So the top foods that people are sensitive to is gluten and dairy. There's other foods as well, like nightshades, corn, soy, chocolate, and things like that. But majority of the time, if you wake up one morning and your back is killing you, okay, number one thing, you've got to look at what you ate the night before. So if a food sensitivity is what's driving the gut issues, then if you look back the night before, you're probably going to find you had either a ton of gluten, you had a ton of dairy, or you had a ton of sugar, or you had a ton of seed oils. Okay, those are like the top things that typically flare things up there. And if that's the case, then you got to focus on avoiding those foods for some time, taking the right kind of natural antihistamines to help calm down the inflammation from that. And then, of course, figuring out the right herbs to help heal your gut. So that's kind of as short as I could kind of make it there, Dr. Tim. But what kind of things do you find is important to mention with patients, and maybe what else would you kind of add to that, or any tips you would add? And then we could also, I think it would be helpful to talk about like, hey, if you think one of these things is your issues, what are maybe some common herbs that we find that patients could try, or even maybe specific diets and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I honestly think the most important thing in the first place is the patient education piece of what we do. So obviously having conversations like this, maybe a bit more in depth and a bit more personalized to the patients that we see in the office. But I mean, you do it just as much as I do. We have phone consultations that we have with new patients before they come in. And so with having those phone consultations, we'll talk about like, hey, so do you find that when you're working out, your abs don't really want to work all that well? Like, do you feel like you struggle to stabilize? Do you feel like, maybe one side, like one glute is stronger than the other? Do you feel like, you eat certain foods and you get bloated? Like, what's the timing on things? You name it. How long's it been going on? Have you sought out other treatment? There's all kinds of things that we'll kind of take a mini history when we are, having these phone consultations with people. So then that way we can get a good idea of where things are rooted and just kind of express ideas of like, hey, yeah, I think it's probably this, and this, and we'll just have to work through those things. And this is what things look like if you come into the office. But with doing that, I always like to talk about, there's the functional medicine side of what we do. And if labs are necessary, it's great. We'll look at those, develop a good plan based on that. But there's a lot of stuff that's left out. And when it comes to pain complaints, labs aren't going to tell you basically anything. And so with pain complaints as they relate to gut issues or other internal issues, there are muscle imbalances that will lead to pain. So let's take this back to a like more of a traditional chiropractic approach. So anytime there is pain, there's typically some sort of myofascial dysfunction or some sort of subluxation. And so we have to figure out where that is, what's going on, and treat those things. And so traditional chiropractic philosophy says you treat the subluxation by adjusting, downstream neurologic tone regulates, muscles regulate, and therefore pain improves. Um, with what we do, our philosophy, and you can give your 2 cents on this too, Dr. Joel, but I think we're pretty aligned on this. Our philosophy is more so myofascial tone regulates the bones and subluxation. And so if you fix that, subluxation goes away. And so with that being said, a part of our process with figuring out low back pain and figuring out if it is a gut issue, a lot of times I'll go through and I'll figure out, okay, well, if quads are weak, abs are weak, well, yeah, that's a small intestine issue most likely, but we can then stimulate the reflexes for the small intestine, stimulate the Chapman's reflex, or rub over the VRP, you name it. And if that improves it by placing a calming stimulus into the small intestine through the nervous system, and it strengthens that muscle, it tells us, okay, well, that's tied in. But that is one piece of that whole process. Beyond that, it's not like your abs and your quads are going to be the only muscles that are weak. And so very, very common that I'll see that one side, glute med, piriformis will be weak as well. And so you'll basically, to exaggerate, somebody will be standing with one hip just stuck way out to the side. And so their spine will be all curved and they'll get lumbar disc issues, you name it. Super, super common. And so if that's an issue, we can then figure out, okay, well, those muscles are weak. If I stimulate the small intestine again, is that going to correct those? And so when it does, that tells us, okay, well, these aren't necessarily classic small intestine related muscles, but they are pointing to the small intestine. And so all of our indicators will kind of funnel towards this underlying gut issue. Those ones are super common. There are other myofascial things that we can do to assess and see if your body as a whole is holding on really, really, really tight and it causes tension in the low back. There's like a ligament stretch thing that we can do to see if under stretch, sustained stretch, things let go, but instead they'll guard, and that will be corrected by correcting the small intestine oftentimes as well. And so there's a lot of different things that we'll do to gather these indicators for dysfunction. We will, say somebody has like a SIBO issue or gut issue, has some low back pain, but they've got constipation. We'll push up on the ileocecal valve, push up on the valve of Houston, see if those things are neurologically stuck closed and not working properly. And when we create that weakness off of another muscle, we can then figure out, okay, well, does small intestine fix this too? And so everything related to the complaint, low back pain indicators, gut indicators, valve indicators, all of those things should funnel towards the same common root, which is the gut. And so very, very important that we gather indications for every single symptom that a patient has. And so I'll go through it and find as many things as I can, because not only is it awesome for us to be able to, track progress using those to see improvement each visit, but when somebody's abs don't work, or somebody's glute med doesn't work, or when they bend over and touch their toes and they can't do it, and then you correct the small intestine issue by treating the Chapman's reflex, and then they can magically touch their toes or even put their palms on the floor, that is a whole lot more believable than like, hey, I pushed on this, poked on this, rubbed this reflex, told you to take this supplement, and that's going to fix you. It can come off a little funny sometimes. But if you say, okay, you couldn't touch your toes, and because of all these muscle weaknesses and treating these reflexes and all this stuff, we corrected that, and it's related to your small intestine, there's objective feedback in the visit that tells the patient we have made improvement to the neurology. And so there's a bit more buy-in with that. And so I like that aspect, because if somebody has pain and you're able to correct that or improve it, and along with range of motion and other things like that, immediately in a visit, somebody's like, oh my God, this is really cool stuff. I can't tell you how many patients I've had where I have them touch their toes or try to, and they're like, I can't do that. And then we treat a reflex, and all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, I've never done that before. Touch my toes. And it's just from treating the small intestine related reflex. There's other examples where that'll happen too, but that's honestly the biggest one. It's gather these indicators, funnel it, see where it's going, and then treat that underlying issue, which is usually the small intestine. So, anyway, on that note, Let's kind of get into, what are some practical steps to fix these things? Maybe some general herbs, things like that. I would argue the most common thing that people have going on here is some sort of microbiome imbalance, whether it's bacteria, fungus, parasites. They all kind of tend to be lumped into the same category. It's just a small intestine dysbiosis. Foods, somewhat common. Those are a bit more general as far as recommendations go, and it mainly from a at-home perspective involves like a food journal to help figure out what's driving stuff. Um, but herbs. So, Dr. Joel, why don't you tell us for each of those things or whatever you would like to add, what are some of your go-to nutrients that you'll get for this stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So if it's bacterial or fungal issue, meaning, hey, they have bloating, they have gas, we jumped in with the muscle testing, and Dr. Tim, I apologize. I need a side tangent on this just a little bit in regards to like, what about stool tests, right? A lot of patients ask about stool tests. We talk about this in our gut episodes, but essentially the stool tests can sometimes be good. They're sometimes very inconsistent. And I was at a seminar this last weekend, and essentially they're talking about how, the top SIBO doctor in the world, this guy that's considered the top SIBO doctor, he always sends a stool sample to two different lab stool companies because they're going to find different things. And so it helps them have a bigger picture. And I'm like, wow, that's really discouraging for
Yeah,
anyone doing, lab tests because, it's like, man, who knows if this is even the full picture? It sounds like it's not. And so now, Dr.
it's
Tim,
funny.
we don't run a ton of stool tests because, in general, we offer it to patients, but what we find is it gives you a little bit of information, but like, for example, it'll show you bacteria well. It doesn't usually catch fungus very well. It definitely doesn't catch parasites well. But even if you find like a perfect test here for bacteria, what herbs are needed to fix the problem? The lab test doesn't show you that. And there's 25 to 30 different things that we'll use for bacterial imbalances. So what we do is we love the muscle testing. The muscle testing allows us in the office to muscle test the different reflexes on patients using the homeopathic vials as well to test, okay, what's going on here? What herbs do you need? And we get really, really specific results with that. So, number one for bacteria, and I would say fungus, those are pretty closely tied, but I would say olive leaf is probably number one. I would say an herb called Malia is number two. I have found that astragalus tends to be helpful, not the top one necessarily, but very helpful in the long run. And then also an herb called usnea. That's spelled USNE. I find that those tend to all test uh, um, well enough for me to recommend them to people. I find in general with fungus that yeah, olive leaf is usually good, Malia is good, but golden thread is amazing. Occasionally golden seal and morinda, those can be really helpful. And then for parasites, I find black walnut and artemisia, which is wormwood. I find those a ton. And then I would say like morinda, like really high dose morinda occasionally. Um, those would probably be my top recommendations there. And then as far as nutrition goes, I would say if you have any gas or bloating, like usually following a low FODMAP diet is really, really helpful. But what I would also recommend doing is looking up things like high oxalate foods. You can look this up online. High oxalate foods, high salicylate foods. Salicylate is spelled SALICYLATE, high salicylate foods, as well as foods high in anti nutrients. Look that up as well. And then look up like antifungal diet. Antifungal diet is essentially where you take out like all sweeteners, you take out like all fruit juices. I'm actually going to read a little bit of a list here. Like stevia is the only thing that you should really have with that, but you take out all other sweeteners, take out dried fruit, take out alcohol, take out anything like fermented, anything with yeast. And so in office, what we do is we find, hey, there's usually two, three, four herbs that you need. You need to follow this certain nutrition plan for like 3 weeks, and things radically improve over that time. Sometimes it takes 6 weeks, sometimes it takes a little bit longer. But when with the muscle testing, we can be really specific. Outside of that, it's a little bit of, like, hey, you probably need to follow this plan, nutrition plan, probably for more like 4 to 8 weeks, and then try to figure out what herbs are really going to help you. It's a little bit more of a kind of a trying and kind of trying to figure out things process. So But that's generally what I recommend. Those are the herbs, and then that's the nutrition plan, Dr. Tim. And then, of course, I didn't even mention, but a low FODMAP diet can usually be really helpful as well. That's probably one of the top ones. I have some really smart colleagues that have said, no, you don't usually need to do that. Usually, if you avoid the other things like the food sensitivities and the antifungal diet. But I find a lot of people do really well with a low FODMAP diet, and so I tend to recommend that a lot. So,
Yeah.
and these are all things that, again, you can just look up online. You can find them pretty easily. If you need like a handout or something, you can always reach out to us. But pretty easy things to find. And then, of course, we didn't mention this, but herbs. We love Supreme Nutrition, the herbal company. Super high quality stuff, and definitely the top herb company that we use here in our office. So, Dr. Tim, anything to add to that?
I was going to add low FODMAP, and then you took it right out of my mouth. I actually, to reinforce your point, I've got one patient who, we've done all kinds of stuff to get to where her gut appears to be totally healthy. But as soon as she adds in any FODMAP foods back in, gut's a mess in her back immediately. It's like just crippling. Um, and that's always what causes it. It's eating FODMAPs. And so she just always has to avoid them. I wish we could uncover more and get to where that was tolerable. But I mean, she's like, if I got to eat like this and I feel good, then whatever. Because I had pain for, 15 years and now it's gone. And every now and then, like once a year, maybe it'll act up and we'll have to do some stuff. But um, that's that. So, but yeah, there's plenty of herbs. We'll use a lot of andrographis and morinda. We'll use Oregon grapefruit, gentian root. Those are probably pretty common as well. It just all depends. Like you said, we'll use the muscle testing in the office to figure out exactly what patients need, and so we'll just have to work through things with patients and see. So, just all depends. All depends. This is of all the topics that we cover, this is not something that we can give, hey, try these three and we'll see how things do. It's why we don't do a whole lot of telemedicine. It's because things just do not tend to sort themselves out all that well if we don't actually see patients in the office. So, but yeah, heavily encourage everybody. If you have some sort of low back pain that's been around a really long time, you've got maybe some gut symptoms with it, then maybe go find somebody who does the systems healthcare technique near you. And then hopefully they can help you out, get through that. And if it's all this, if your issue is what we've talked about today, usually it takes about 6 weeks. Herb day 1, 2 weeks later, do another, 2 weeks later, do another. Do that for 2 weeks, should be good to go. And your pain should be gone. Things should be totally back to normal. There are some outliers. If any of my patients are listening and they're an outlier, I apologize. But it does happen. But overwhelming majority of people, it falls within that category. So, but anyway, anything else to add, Dr. Joel, or do we wrap things up?
No, that's good. That's good. Let's go ahead and wrap up. So I'm Dr. Joel Miller. The practice here is Freedom Health and Wellness. We're in Flower Mound, Texas. The website is drjoelmiller.com. You can find us online there. You can reach out to us if you have any questions, if you have any suggestions on future episode topics. We're open to considering those as well. Otherwise, I hope that this episode has been helpful for you, and definitely consider going into our podcast and checking out. We've done 16 other episodes. So if there's a condition you're dealing with or a loved one's dealing with, we probably made an episode on it. So search around and see if there's anything there that may help you.
Awesome. I'm Dr. Tim Augustiniak here at Flourish Functional Wellness Center in Bentonville, Arkansas. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to find me at flourishfwc.com. At the top of the page, we have links to all the socials. At the bottom, we have all the contact info for the office. So let us know if you want us to chat about anything else. And thank you, everybody, so much for listening.